It may be the most recognized image in Japanese art. A vast wall of water, its form like reaching hands, and far beyond it, quiet and unmoved, Mount Fuji. We often remember the wave, but this series is not about a wave. It is about a mountain. In the early 1830s, at the age of 70, Katsushika Hokusai began publishing what would become his most enduring vision, 36 Views of Mount Fuji. Today, we will move beyond a single famous image. We will trace the origins of the series, the cultural moment that made it possible, the man who created it, the blue that transformed it, and finally, we will see all 46 prints in order to understand why one mountain was worth drawing again and again. Before we go further, one important detail. Despite its title, 36 Views of Mount Fuji does not contain 36 prints. It contains 46. When Katsushika Hokusai began publishing 36 Views of Mount Fuji in the early 1830s, the plan was simple. 36 designs, each presenting Mount Fuji from a different place, season, or condition. They were printed in the large urban format as full-color nishikie, the most advanced woodblock printing of the time. Rich pigments, bold compositions, and a striking new imported blue gave the series an immediacy unlike earlier landscape prints. The response was overwhelming. The first 36 were so successful that the publisher commissioned 10 additional designs. The title remained the same, but the mountain expanded. 46 views in total. This was not a limited, aristocratic project. These prints were affordable, reproducible, made for the townspeople of Edo. At the time, devotion to Mount Fuji was surging. Religious confraternities known as Fujiko organized pilgrimages to the sacred peak. Even those who never climbed it carried its image in their imagination. Hokusai's series arrived at exactly the right moment. It was part travel guide, part devotional object, part visual experiment. And it became one of the first major landscape series to capture widespread popular attention in Japanese print culture. The mountain did not belong to the elite. It belonged to everyone. Why this mountain? Japan has many sacred peaks, but only one came to represent Japan itself. As the highest mountain in Japan, standing in isolation, Fuji is visible from vast distances. Because of this, it was seen from countless villages and roads. Its shape became familiar, even to those who never climbed it. Long before photography, before mass media, before modern nationalism, Mount Fuji was already a shared symbol. It appeared in poetry, in travel diaries, in folding screens, in everyday conversation. People who had never seen it still recognized its shape. The mountain was distant, yet familiar. Unreachable for most, yet constantly imagined. In the late Edo period, travel culture expanded. Highways connected the country. Guidebooks circulated. Pilgrimage routes became organized. Even if one never made the journey, the idea of travel became part of urban life. Mount Fuji became one of the central images in that imagination. It was not only sacred, it was geometric, stable, perfectly proportioned. A form simple enough to remember, yet powerful enough to dominate any composition. For artists, It was an ideal subject. For publishers, it was a guaranteed audience. For viewers, it was something both personal and collective. When Hokusai chose Fuji, he was not choosing a random landscape. He was choosing the one image everyone already carried in their mind. And instead of depicting it once as a monument, he did something radical. He mossed it. He placed the mountain behind fishermen, beneath bridges, beside travelers, beyond rooftops. Fuji was no longer only distant and isolated. It entered the frame of daily life. In doing so, Hokusai recontextualized the sacred mountain as a recurring visual presence in everyday life. The obsession was not only his, it already belonged to the culture. When Hokusai began this series, he was around 70 years old. In the Edo period, average life expectancy at birth was roughly 30 to 40 years, largely due to high infant mortality. Although some people did live into their 60s and 70s, reaching 70 was still relatively uncommon in that society. By modern standards, in a country where life expectancy now exceeds 80 years, 70 may not seem extraordinary. But in Hokusai's time, it marked the later stage of life. Yet rather than slowing down, he began one of the most ambitious projects of his career. He had changed his name many times throughout his life, each name marking a new phase, a reinvention. In his later years, he called himself Katsushika Hokusai, but he also signed works as Gakyō Rōjin Manji, the old man mad about painting. The name reflected his deep commitment to art. In his own words, he wrote that at 70, he had finally begun to understand the structure of animals and plants, and that only at 100 would he become truly divine in art. This was not the confidence of a satisfied master. It was the impatience of someone who felt he had just begun. The series, 36 Views of Mount Fuji, was not a nostalgic project. It was an experiment. Actors and courtesans had long been the primary subjects of ukiyo-e. Landscapes existed, but they were secondary. With this series, Hokusai shifted the focus of ukiyo-e toward landscape. He played with perspective. He used extreme foregrounds. He reduced Fuji to a small triangle in the distance. He let waves, bridges, and rooftops overpower it. This was not simply repetition. It was variation, almost systematic. Each print asks the same question. How does Mount Fuji change when the world around it changes? Or perhaps more precisely, how does the world change when Fuji remains the same? At 70, Hokusai was not looking backward. He was using one mountain to test the limits of composition, space, and vision. The method was not limited to composition. It extended to materials. Among them, one pigment in particular transformed the visual character of the series. Prussian Blue. Prussian Blue was not simply a new color within the series. It introduced a different material possibility into ukiyo-e production. Unlike traditional plant-based indigo, the imported pigment was chemically stable and capable of producing a deeper, more saturated tone. It allowed for stronger contrasts and more sustained gradation, particularly in depictions of sky and water. By the early 19th century, this synthetic pigment, developed in Europe in the early 18th century, had entered Japan through limited but active trade networks. Its presence in 36 Views of Mount Fuji reflects the material realities of the late Edo period, when imported goods, though controlled, were circulating within urban culture. In prints such as Red Fuji and the Great Wave of Kanagawa, Ru is not merely descriptive, it structures space, it stabilizes distance, it defines atmospheric depth. The mountain itself was an established cultural symbol. The pigment, however, was the product of global exchange. Their convergence in this series demonstrates how a familiar national image could be materially shaped by international circulation. Fuji had long occupied a central place in Japanese cultural memory. Yet the visual form through which it became internationally recognizable was inseparable from a pigment that originated abroad. We now look at the complete series. As you watch, consider several recurring elements. The geometry. Notice the mathematical precision, the contrast between the sharp triangle of Fuji and the perfect circles of barrels, water wheels, and waves. The Prussian Blue. Observe how this imported pigment defines the deep sea and the thinning air of the high atmosphere. The bold perspective. Watch how Hokusai forces you to peek at the mountains through bridges, buildings, and even the legs of laborers. The scale. See how Fuji shrinks to a tiny speck or looms as a giant, yet always remains the anchor of the scene. The human presence. Look at the travelers, fishermen, craftsmen, figures absorbed in daily labor beneath a mountain that exceeds them in duration. 46 variations on a single motif. Here is the complete series in its original order. The Great Wave of Kanagawa. A towering breaker dominates the scene, its swirl crafted with precise calculation, while a small Fuji anchors the distant horizon. Fine wind, clear morning, red Fuji. Fuji glows red in the clear morning air, its broad slopes rising across the horizon, the wood grains subtly animating the mountain surface. Rainstorm beneath the summit. Fuji's calm summit meets sudden storm below, with dark clouds and lightning drawing the eye toward nature's contrast of stillness and motion. Under Mannen Bridge at Fukagawa. The massive arc of Mannen Bridge frames a distant Fuji, turning the city structure into a deliberate act of looking. Fujimigahara in Owari Province. A massive barrel hoop dominates the foreground, its circular opening precisely framing a distant Fuji at the center of the composition. Inume Pass in Kai Province. On the steep path at Inume, travelers and pack horses press along a diagonal mountain road as Fuji appears faint beyond the layered ridges. Senju in Musashi Province. Along the wide riverbanks of Senju, workers and travelers animate the open plain, while Fuji stands quietly beyond the expanse of sky and water. The cushion pine at Aoyama. Beneath a broad, cushion-shaped pine at Aoyama, picnickers and passers-by pose in the foreground, while Fuji rises through mist beyond the tree's sweeping branches. Sundai, Edo. From the high ground of Surudadai, figures, merchants, pilgrims, and samurai populate a lively Edo foreground, while a distant Fuji rises beyond the city's green expanse. Kama River in Musashi Province. At the Tamadawa, drifting haze separates river and mountain, setting a boldly enlarged Fuji apart from the foreground in a composition restrained to tones of blue. Shichirigahama Beach in Sagami Province. As evening light fades over Shichirigahama, the village and island recede into silhouette, while Fuji stands luminous beneath towering summer clouds. Tsukuda Island in Musashi Province. As evening light colors the sky over Tsukuda Island, boats for fishing, transport, and travel cross the waters, with Fuji rising calmly beyond the busy mouth of the Sumida. Ushibori in Hitachi Province. A shallow-bottomed tomabune cuts diagonally across the foreground as a man empties rice water into the river, and two egrets startle into flight in the still air before dawn. Kajikazawa in Kai Province. Jagged rocks and splashing currents evoke a seascape as a fisherman casts his net beside his son, their triangular forms echoing the distant peak of Fuji above. Lake Sula in Shinano Province. Two pines form a sweeping V in the foreground, opening onto the lake below, where a small Benzaiten shrine echoes the distant outline of Fuji. In the mountains of Totomi Province. As carpenters saw a massive upright beam in Totomi, smoke from a child's fire drifts diagonally across the scene, echoing the clouds around Fuji, glimpsed between the supporting timbers. Mishima Pass in Kai Province. A colossal tree rises through the center of the composition, with Fuji towering beyond as three travelers join hands to measure its immense girth. Ejiri in Suruga Province. In Ejiri, a sudden gust sweeps through the scene. Papers whirl skyward, hats scatter, trees bend, and travelers crouch against the force, while Fuji rises unmoved beyond the turmoil of the wind. Asakusa Honganji Temple in Edo. The vast temple roof fills the foreground, its small rooftop workers emphasizing its scale, while Fuji rises beyond at nearly the same height. Umezawa Hamlet, fields in Sagami Province. Cranes gather along the water as two rise towards Fuji beneath parted clouds, evoking auspicious imagery rendered in luminous Prussian blue. Lower Meguro. Falconers pause by the roadside with their hawks, while farmers work and watch nearby, and Fuji appears modestly between the rolling hills beyond. Sea route of Kazusa Province. Off the coast of Kazusa, two carefully rendered vessels sail in parallel, their tall curved sails arching across the scene as Fuji appears small beyond their sweep. Noboto Bay. Amid clam gatherers and laughing children, a great torii dominates the scene, its scale and angle precisely arranged so that Fuji appears poised within its opening. Yoshida on the Tokaido Road. The interior of the Fujimi Tea House opens through a raised blind onto a framed vista of Fuji, as shop signs, local specialties, and even the traveler's garments discreetly advertise the publisher Eijudo, blending landscape with lively commercial detail. Snowy morning at Koishikawa. Seen from a tea house balcony at Koishikawa, the foreground bustle of snow-viewing women contrasts with the still, distant form of snow-clad Fuji, as three birds traverse the open sky and extend the composition upward. Viewing the sunset over Ryogoku Bridge from the Onmaya embankment. At the moment a ferry departs the Onmayagashi shore, passengers huddle and cool their hands in the river, while the boatman faces the sunset outline of Fuji across the water. Tago Bay near Ejiri on the Tokaido Road. Fuji towers beyond Mount Ashitaka, while salt makers toil quietly on the beach. Yet in the immediate foreground, four vessels battle a turbulent sea, creating a dramatic opposition between calm distance and restless proximity. Enoshima Island in Sagami Province. Pilgrims hurry across the sandbar, rushing toward the sacred island before the tide returns. Nihonbashi Bridge in Edo. The chaotic energy of 1,000 merchants framed by the rigid Western perspective leading to the silent, distant peak. Mitsui store at Suruga-cho in Edo. From the viewpoint of a customer on Suruga-cho, the steep roof of Mitsui Echigoya confronts the sky, echoing Fuji's distant peak as a celebratory kite floats above the thriving street below. The lake at Hakone in Sagami Province. A scene of absolute stillness where the vertical lines of the cedars meet the horizontal mist in a quiet, rhythmic prayer. Mount Fuji reflected in Lake Kawaguchi in Kai Province. A surreal impossibility, the brown peak of summer mirrored in the water as the white snow of winter. Watermill at Ondem. The relentless motion of the water wheel and the toil of the city, spinning against the eternal silence of the mountain. Hodogaya on the Tokaido Road. Exhausted travelers and weary horses resting beneath the rhythmic pine trees. A comic touch of human fatigue in the mountain's shadow. Sekiya Village on the Sumida River. 3 horses gallop through the morning mist, their speed echoed by a pine tree that mimics the very shape of the distant peak. Sazai Ho at the Temple of the 500 Arhats. From the spiraling galleries of Sazai-do at Gohyaku-Rakanji, viewers lean against the balustrade and gaze across the Sumida River toward Fuji, the stable perspective lending the scene a clear and tranquil air. The back of Mount Fuji from Minobu River. The rugged rear Fuji peering through steep cliffs and rising clouds, a jagged rhythm of peaks and rushing water. Mount Fuji from Pleasure Quarter at Senju. The rhythmic red gear of a passing lord's procession, watched by 2 curious farm women resting in the quiet fields. Mount Fuji from tea plantation of Katakura in Suruga Province. A sea of green tea leaves, where women labor in rhythmic rows beneath the vast silent gaze of the mountain. Mount Fuji from Gotenyama Hill in Shinagawa on the Tokaido. A celebration of spring, where joyful cherry blossom viewers are framed by the mountain peeking through the pink canopy. Dawn at Isawa in Kai Province. The frantic energy of travelers starting their day, harmonized by the serene mist of a river at dawn. Timbayard at Honjo. A study of human motion and geometry, where the vertical lines of stacked timber frame the distant, silent peak. Mount Fuji, from Kanaya on the Tokaido. Humanity braves the churning, sea-like swells of the Oi River, their struggle mirrored in the rhythmic waves of the earth. Nakahara, in Sagami Province. Pious pilgrims and busy peddlers pass by, while a lone fisherman casts his net, indifferent to the world, beneath the mountain's gaze. Onoshinden, in Suruga Province. The comical rhythm of burdened oxen and marching steps as startled herons take flight into the morning glow. People climbing the mountain. The only view without the mountain silhouette, capturing instead the raw exhaustion of pilgrims crawling through the clouds. Across all 46 prints, Hokusai uses inventive compositions and the striking depth of Prussian Blue to bring Mount Fuji into the heart of daily life. By capturing the mountain alongside laborers, travelers, and shifting seasons, he reveals Fuji not just as a distant landmark, but as a living, timeless companion to the human experience. Through this series, we see how a single subject can be endlessly reimagined through the energy of the ordinary.